if we don't do this right now, we cannot just aim to have our long-term performance, for example, that we may have with universal design. So inclusion goes with sustainability, but with social sustainability for sure.
Sustainable futures don't happen by chance. They're shaped by inclusive leadership, dialogue, and the partnerships across systems. Welcome to Conversations on Sustainable Futures. I am Daniela Bas. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, in whichever part of the world you are. Today we have a very special guest, and I would like to share with you something that affects millions of people, businesses and families, the future of flying. Aviation is being tested by geographical instability, fuel price volatility, seasonal travel pressure, and growing expectations around inclusion and accessibility. But behind every route, ticket, and assistance request, there is a bigger question. How do we design air travel so that it remains safe, efficient, and dignified for everyone? So my guest today is Dr. Linda Ristagno, Assistant Director, Consumer Experience and Facilitation, as well as External Affairs at IATA. Linda, welcome.
Thank you, Daniela. It's a long title for a little woman like me, but thank you, Daniela.
Well, yes. As you say in Italy, we say that the good wine is in the small bottle, whatever. Linda, I usually ask my guests a jolly question. Surprise, a surprise. Before we speak about airports, passengers, and regulations, if you could board a flight tomorrow with no agenda, no laptop, and no meetings, where would you go and what would you absolutely not pack?
I would certainly go to Sardinia, which is my favorite place in the world, and I would not pack a coat, especially now because it's at 32 degrees. So yeah, with nothing, just myself.
How lovely, no family, no worries, everything stays out of your luggage. Yes. I like it.
Yes.
Well, Linda, as I said, Linda Ristagno covers a very important role in IATA, which is the International Air Transport Association, where she works at the crossroad of aviation policy, regulations, and accessibility. And Linda's public work focuses on making air travel safer, more dignified, and more consistent for passengers, all passengers, particularly with those who have a disability or some kind of reduced mobility, recognized by Open Doors organization for her contribution to accessibility and equity in aviation. Linda brings a rare industry perspective on how airlines, governments, and passengers can move from good intentions to workable systems. Is it correct, Linda? Would you like to add something?
Thank you, Daniela. Thank you. Yes, it is correct. My role indeed is to ensure that everybody flies safely and with dignity, particularly persons with disabilities, with any kind of disability, because if we say that aviation is the business of freedom, then freedom has to be for everyone. And IATA represents more than 350 airline members. So we try to, as much as possible, to harmonize the internal policy for airlines, and we support the state regulators to create consistent rules for all passengers, mostly for persons with disabilities. Yes, passengers with disabilities. Thank you.
You're a woman and a leader. And you are in a very senior position in an extremely complex global aviation environment. So what has your leadership journey taught you about credibility, influence, and persistence, especially when, change requires bringing many different actors around the same table?
When it comes to women in leadership, I have learned over the years that actually credibility is built day after day. And this is really about being consistent and transparent with all persons which work around you and over time. In aviation, we work constantly with different stakeholders, being these the passengers, the state regulators, or internal stakeholders as well. And I think that authority or influence doesn't come with the authority. Sometimes, yes, you have to be directive, it's true, but I think that you really win, especially with the passengers, when you bring the passengers along with you. And this is the case of my work with accessibility. Especially on this work, this has taken persistence. So I had to be very persistent at the very beginning. When I started, I launched the accessibility program in IATA. And this is because changes don't happen overnight. So, for example, changes internally with our standards, for example, which we are reviewing right now. And you have to convince also your stakeholders regards to the direction that you want to take your job, and you have to take your internal people with you. So for me, a lot it is about building trust and staying being really focused on where you want to go, even if sometimes progress comes slowly, which is not the case of the accessibility program, I have to say.
I think that what you're saying is, in a nutshell, empathy on one hand, clear
Yes.
ideas where you want to lead the group towards to, and persistence, right?
Yes, 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 yes. Empathy is very important. Absolutely. There has to be empathy, especially when you deal with the passengers. And I deal with the passengers because I want to hear from them their experience. Because if you need to change your internal processes and internal policy as well, you have to listen from those who fly. Because how do you make the changes if you don't ask persons which changes they're aiming to?
Directly to the source. Linda, when you think about inclusive leadership in aviation, what does it mean in practical terms? Is it about accessibility policies, or is it also about changing the way systems are designed, decisions are made, and passengers are understood?
I mean, for example, inclusivity. There is a lot within inclusivity, inclusive leadership. We speak a lot about design, about inclusive design, but inclusive design, it is possible from beginning. For me, it's the question that I ask myself and I ask my colleagues is, are we actually thinking about different passenger needs early on, or are we trying to fix this later? And we can do both. However, my recommendation is always, let's just think with inclusion from the start. Because fixing is possible, but not always possible, especially when you look at airport environment or aircraft environment. So this is the direction that especially now we are taking. So building inclusiveness since the very beginning. That's why we talk with all the different stakeholders, including aircraft manufacturers and airport designers as well.
Are they paying attention? Do they understand how relevant, to start from scratch in the correct way is the best also for the aircrafts and those who produce airplanes? Or do you find some resistance there? And if so, how can we help them to overcome this kind of resistance?
No, they listen, they understand, especially since accessibility is becoming a society thing, which is very important and which is right. They listen because they understand that persons with disabilities not only need to travel, but love to travel. So it is important that, for example, when it comes to aircraft design, aircrafts have as much as possible, especially for long flights, accessible lavatories, or, for example, where the studies and research is going now, is the opportunity to accommodate a certain type of wheelchairs on board of the aircraft. Which is feasible, which may be feasible in the future, but still, what can we do for those passengers who will not be able to travel on that seating, which is designed specifically for those passengers with physical disabilities? What we do, for example, because on the aircraft there will be the possibility of only one. So what do we do for them, for the other passengers who may want to come on board and still have their own mobility aid, but has to go in the cargo compartment of the aircraft. So for me, inclusivity is also this, to think to all the different aspects. So what we do with those passengers who have less visible disabilities or specific needs, for example, with passengers who are growing old, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
So I am understanding from your words that aviation is finally, slowly understanding that it's not an operational exception, but rather it's a core part of a good service design. So when an airline asks for medical forms, it happens from a passenger who is not sick, but has a disability, say missing an arm or being paraplegic or something that is a consequence of something that happened, but that person right now is very healthy. Is that a safety requirement or maybe a misunderstanding, meaning that it is not required, but some airlines still think it is required? Or is it a sign the systems are still not mature enough?
I have to take a step back for this. When I started talking, it was about accessibility. And there is a reason we in aviation look at accessibility, because accessibility is for everyone. Disability is a medical term which means that a person has been diagnosed as a condition, a medical condition. This is not where we want to go. It's true that there are also safety requirements, for example, for the safety of the passenger, where there is the need of a medical form. By the way, we are reviewing the medical form and we are digitizing them right now. I think there is a misunderstanding often about safety requirements. As you said, disability, it's not necessarily a medical condition, and safety is important for everyone. But passengers with disabilities, in most of the cases, are independent and don't really have that medical condition. For example, problems that prevent them to fly, or for which they may need a safety assistance. I think that sometimes processes, but also regulations, because when it comes to medical forms, are regulations that require airlines for medical forms. I think that those regulations haven't just caught up yet. And this may create unnecessary barriers, which we are working on with some state regulators and internally as well, to prevent. What I'm trying to say is that this really points to the need for better regulations, for better standards, and more modernized approaches, which, for example, digitalization may help. Like, for example, the digitalization with the recently approved disability card in Europe. Yeah.
That's a good thing to know. It just happened to me recently. I'll be flying soon over ocean, and it happens very seldom, but it happened that this airline asked me to have a medical certificate, so I had to go to my medical doctor, fill a form about medical issues that I have none. Yes, I use a wheelchair, So I found that rather inconvenient. So good to know that, you know, some airlines who might be still a little bit behind are working on that. Thank you so much. And now we can pass to the second part of our conversation. Let's talk about the past, the present, and the future.
Yes.
So I usually ask the question about the past, starting with once upon a time, flying was presented as the business of freedom. Now, looking back at your career in aviation policy and accessibility, Linda, when did you first realize that freedom to fly is not experienced equally by everyone?
The first time I realized was there were actually two different times in my life. One is very personal, and the other one is related to my job. So the first time I realized when, my grandmother, my so much beloved and missed grandmother was paraplegic. So the first time I realized that it was not freedom for her, and we had moved from one part of the world to another one, so she had to come and visit. She wanted to come and visit us. So she had, I have to say, some difficulties, great people to support. So that is when I realized that she really needed help in that case, and she couldn't experience the freedom that she may have wanted. I also in that case realized that it was a society issue. We are talking about 30 years ago. So it was still very, the world was very much behind compared to today, because it's true that things are moving slowly, but not that slow, I have to say, because in very few years, the world has progressed enormously, yes, including aviation as well. And that was the first time. The second time was for my job. When I started this project, it was 17. The first thing I did was really, as I told you before, I really talked to the persons who need to fly and have certain conditions or certain disabilities. They don't have that freedom to fly, let's put it like this. So when I started, I immediately said, okay, I have to talk to people. Because I cannot just talk to airline members or to my colleagues. So I started investigating to whom I should talk, and Eric, Open Doors for Disabilities, came and I spoke to Eric. And then a colleague of mine who was working on safety told me, Linda, we have actually a colleague who is in safety, in cabin safety, and he is disabled. So I called this person and I said, listen, I'm starting this project and I want to learn, but I don't want to learn the processes. I want to learn, what do you need? Tell me, what do you need? And he told me, Linda, I need really to fly with safety. Of course, I need to be safe, but with dignity. Yes. So he explained me what dignity meant for him, because he had a serious condition, basically. So this is where I started, framing it as the business of freedom. Then it has to be really freedom for everyone, wherever it is possible, because in some cases it is just not possible, but we have to be honest to say that this is not possible. Not and this yet. Is what I have with my people. I'm honest, absolutely honest.
And this is very important, because the not yet, it means there is something going on, happening in the future, but presently yes. This is what we can offer safely and in a dignified manner. Today, aviation is dealing with the fuel volatility, geographical uncertainty, climate pressure, high passengers demand, and stronger expectations on inclusion. So what is the most urgent leadership challenge for the sector right now from your perspective, Linda?
There is not only one. There are many pressure issues right now, as we know, with all what is going in the world in terms of geopolitical issues. But I still think that the most urgent leadership challenge is really to managing complexity. And there is a lot of complexity right now, being this related to the supply chain or to geopolitical issues, fuel and so on. And I could list, but for me, it's still really managing the complexity that we have while still making progress, which makes sense, which have sense for the passengers as well. That's why I think that right now leaders are balancing cost pressures, sustainability, the operational resilience, the supply chain resilience, but at the same time, the expectations around inclusion and the customer experience are rising. So customers, they want to fly. And I think that we have to look very closely at our customers right now. The risk with all these pressure things that are happening around us is that inclusion in this case may be seen as something that you deal with later. Not all the time, because I see that, for example, I deal with the regulations. So I see that the regulatory pressure is on the rise into the inclusion. I always say that inclusion should be part of the solution, not an accessibility burden or not an additional burden on afterthought issue. So, because if we don't do this right now, then we have to review after. And actually, we cannot just aim to have our long-term performance, for example, that we may have with universal design. So there is no sustainable approach anymore. So inclusion goes with sustainability, but with social sustainability for sure.
So I want to ask you another question related to the future. So if you were 20 years old in 71, in what kind of aviation world would you like to live? One where accessibility is still a special request? I don't think so, but I want to hear from you. Or one where it has become invisible because it's built into the system, and then by then maybe we will be flying to the moon or to the space as well. Who knows?
No, accessibility shouldn't be seen as a special assistance service that we offer to the passenger. I would like really to see a world, not only an aviation system, aviation, but actually the world, where accessibility is really invisible and people like me are jobless. Because, not because invisible, but not because it's forgotten. It's because we finally, we have built it into the system. I think this is possible if we look at other battles that the world has fought, and we are fighting
won
as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that accessibility should be something where you don't have to ask for it, explain, or just justify why you are making certain changes. It's just there. And for our world, is the transport world seamlessly integrated into travel. Into how people travel, not only through aviation, but on all modes of transport. Yeah.
So on a personal note, I want to thank you for what you are doing, because you are preparing a good future for all of us. So thank you.
Yeah. And if I may, we are also preparing a future which is very much linked into technology, because we are digitizing most of our processes right now, changing the system, our internal system, and making most of the processes seamless. So the passengers remains the owner of his own information, so that is dignity as well, and can travel seamless in all modes of transport. There are a few projects ongoing right now, and I hope that I may see those projects coming to life soon.
Very soon. So we have to wrap up. But I have another question. Um,
Sure.
and it's a question of what is one question you, with the passengers, airlines, and governments, would ask more often? And how would you answer it? So if you were a passenger, airline, or
Yeah.
government, what question would you ask?
Probably the question that I would ask if I were a passenger myself, I would
Yes.
ask, can I come and see how you work? Because sometimes passengers, they come and see us when they have issues. If not, everything is seamless and everyone is happy. I would like myself to bring in a passenger and show this passenger what we do. Not only in my world in terms of standards, but in the real world. So behind, when you go behind the scene and you see what you normally don't see as a spectator. And if I were a state regulator, probably the same. Because sometimes state regulators, they tend to see the aviation industry as really, as we don't want the passengers. But not only we want the passengers, we want passengers with disabilities. We want even more, because those passengers don't travel alone most of the times, they travel with the family. So I just would like to engage in more fruitful discussion with both the passengers and the governments. And of course, in this case, it's not the lobbyist who talks, because this is what I am as well. It's really to have this get together to have more unified vision, because I think this is the only way where we can advance together. And I say this with all my heart, because it's really the way that we can move ahead.
Well, in the middle of the busy summer travel season, this conversation reminds us that flying is not only about moving from one place to another. It means navigating complex systems, as Linda Ristagno just explained. When airports, airlines, and passengers are under pressure, leadership means ensuring clarity, safety, and trust, Linda said, including for passengers with reduced mobility. And Linda Ristagno's commendable work shows us that the future of travel is already about being more human, coordinated, and sustainable. Linda, I thank you so much for the time you spent with us today.
Thank you, Daniela, for inviting me and for giving me the opportunity. Of course, there are 1,000 other things that I would like to say, but thank you very much. Thank you.
If there is a special last message you want to share with us, why not? You're welcome. An invitation, maybe.
Yes, come and see us. I would be very, very happy to show you what we do, how we work, and also to get on board suggestions and advices. Thank you.
So would you wish to contact Linda? You can find her on LinkedIn. Thank you so much, Linda, again.
Thank
Ciao,
you.
ciao. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye, Daniela. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you to my guests and to all of you for listening. New episodes are released on the first and the third Saturday of every month. Music by Damian Morton. Social media production by Create More Studio. I'm Daniela Bas, and this conversation continues.